Hey everybody, it's 10 o'clock and we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure there's some people that might be joining us. I want to thank Emily Ng, who's my assistant, who's going to be also monitoring the chat for us. If you can go into nearpod.com and type in code P8DQK and join into the Nearpod, then we'll be able to, you'll be able to participate. It'll be a lot more interactive for you if you can go ahead and do that. And thanks, Emily. And Emily's typing the Nearpod code over and over into the chat so that you can join it. It looks like we've got about 4 people in so far. And it looks like that's pretty much everybody that's joined us so much. And I just want to thank you for coming. I know the first day back from Christmas break, having professional learning can be a little bit tough. But we're going to go ahead and hopefully this will be really useful for you as well. And so we're going to talk about using Utah Compose as a formative tool. And I know according to Brian and Jody, we may have teachers in here who are from K through, I don't know, K8. And one of the things I just wanted to let my K2 teachers know, if any of you are kindergarten to 2nd grade, and that you can't use Utah Compose, but rather than freaking out and thinking, oh no, I'm in the wrong session or I'm going to sit here, a lot of what we're going to talk about at the beginning is really using any sort of writing practice. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips that you can start using as you start working with writing with the littles, because it's a really important step. And everybody wants to know how to do that. You just don't have access to Utah Compose. So at the end of the presentation, we'll review a lot of the program, but at the beginning, we're going to talk about how you use it effectively, more than just here's how you click in and use Utah Compose. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about applying the formative assessment process during writing instruction using Utah Compose, and we're going to learn how to have your students learn how to revise, edit, and reflect on their writing rather than you doing all the work and providing all the feedback. And then I'm going to teach you an actual formative assessment strategy. We're going to use single point rubrics, which for elementary, especially elementary students, is a really effective way to get them involved in personalized learning and for how they can start to monitor their own progress. And so it's a really important step and a really simple strategy that I happen to love very much. And so you're going to be able to plan some writing instruction today. You're going to consider and plan how to incorporate more student self-directed learning, and then learn how to adapt a single point rubric as we're doing our instruction today. So our next 2 hours are going to be fast-paced and do something. And so we're going to start really quickly with an essential question, and that is, who taught you how to write? And if you're in Nearpod, on the next page, I'm going to ask you to answer that question by typing in your answer on the slide. And then it's kind of slow today. I'm waiting to see what's happening in this. If you can see, I'm going to change the student view to see what's happening with this today. If you can't see the question, go ahead and type in the chat. Who, when we're talking about writing, who taught you how to write? And we're not talking about going from cursive to, from printing to cursive, but actually thinking about how we're supposed to be teaching writing now as a process. How many of you learned that, and where do you think you learned that? Or how you learned how to become a good writer? Would you type that answer? Go ahead and type it in the chat because I'm not sure what's going on with our slide to type it in on Nearpod. And I'll give you about a minute. When it was writing by failing. Yeah, Sherry, I hear you, because you know what? That is one of the most common responses that I get, that most people realize that they learned to write by when they got their first paper back, and basically they felt like a professor had literally opened a vein on it, or that they learned, wait a minute, I have no idea what I'm doing. And since we still have a few other people, I will share with you that one of the things that's so interesting about this is how universal that answer is. How many people actually learned to write when it was really high stakes and they got into college? Now, I will tell you this, if you're under about age 37, you probably got some writing process instruction. And the reason is I know this because about my daughter's 37, and when I was student teaching and she was in 7th grade, that's about the time that 6 traits writing process kind of hit Utah. They started doing a lot of trainings, they started doing workshops, and a lot of people learned to write through 6 traits. And so that's when the first time they saw writing process. If you're older than 37, the reason why some of you, I'm guessing, aren't typing in the answer to this question is because you were probably assigned writing. Most of us were assigned writing. We very rarely had learned to write through some kind of process. Either that or we had teachers who would go in and do lots and lots of give us lots and lots of feedback, and then sometimes you would look at it and do something with it, but most of the time it was just a lot of feedback tended to be focused on conventions, so which is where you get people who say things like, I can't write because I can't spell. Because that is 2 separate processes, and it's something that I want you to remember as we're looking at this today. So thank you, Sherry, for sharing. So we're going to talk today about the fact that teaching writing is difficult. And the reason why it's difficult, and this is my favorite slide of all time, which the elephant in the middle of the room, is the fact that it is hard to teach. And one of the reasons why it's difficult to teach is most of us who are teaching now have very little experience or prior knowledge with what teaching writing looks like as a student. We've gotten lots of instruction on how to look at feedback and what we're supposed to do. And that's one of the reasons why it's really hard. Not only that, I mean, think about the reasons, right? It takes a lot of time. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to know what kind of feedback to give. And the time factor is always huge. And I say time more than once all the time on purpose, because really and truly, that is one of the reasons why it's hard. The other thing is that by the time kids are in like fourth and fifth grade, they don't like to write. They don't like doing writing, and nobody wants to be the teacher that when you say, yeah, we're going to write now, you hear that, and nobody likes that. And it just makes it difficult. It's demoralizing. And then the worst thing about this, the very worst thing, is that you can do every single thing right and still find out that you start looking at what your students have written, and it's like, wait a minute, was I even in the room? And that's when it's even worse, is because you're like, wait a minute, I saw those eyes light up. I saw people doing what I've asked them to do. We worked together as a learning community, and now I don't even think I was even in the room. So that is one of the reasons. So the good thing about this is that with writing is that you don't have to get it right the first time, unlike, say, a brain surgeon. So that's something to remember. Like a lot of this is done by trial and error, and it's just being willing to stick yourself out there and try it. I don't know why my slides are taking so long to load. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. We might be having slow internet today. So one of the things I wanted to point out to you is that how much time do students spend writing? And the Institute of Education Science, based on the National Commission of Writing, recommends that kindergartners should be doing 30 minutes of writing a day and 60 minutes of writing for first graders in order to become competent writers. And a lot of teachers gasp about that, especially now with letters training and a lot of that. But remember, when we're talking about writing, we're not talking about it has to be 30 solid minutes. It can be 10 minutes that you're doing some things, then you move on to another content and you do some other writing. And it's really important that students write in other content areas. That's one of the most critical pieces that you need to know about that, is that students need to know how to write as historians, and how mathematicians write and how scientists write. And that can help do this. So what I would like you to do is in the chat, because I'm not sure if you guys are all in one room together now, is go ahead and turn your cameras on for a minute. And then I'd like you to answer 1 or 2 of these questions in the chat. Talk about how you structure your writing in your weekly schedule. Like, how much time do you think your students are actually writing, and or describe a typical writing lesson. How much time do you think, and this is a pretty simple question, how much time do you think you spend providing individual feedback on writing assignments? And even more importantly, what are your students required to do once you've given all that feedback? And I'm going to give you about, probably 2 or 3 minutes. I'll set a timer, and let's spend about 2 or 3 minutes, and please go ahead and fill answering. And just type it into the chat, because for whatever reason, my content slides for Nearpod are not working well. So, and I don't know if it's my internet or what is going on. So I think it'll just be simpler. Okay, I've set the timer for 2 minutes. And I will tell you guys, this will be a lot more meaningful to you if you actually participate and turn on your cameras and think about it for a second. So you got about 46 seconds to type into the chat. Okay, so Mary says Macy says she spends about 30 minutes. Sherry says she puts her writing instruction, embeds it into her science curriculum, and they write to explain more than anything. And using a rubric is a really good way to do this. Some people are like, yeah, Kelly, thanks. I don't do enough writing in class. The last class I did with planning and assessing. I usually only write on Fridays. And it also depends, by the way, and I will tell you this, I can't do enough writing. The last class only with planning and assessing. Oops. I usually only write on Fridays. And there are times, you know, like everybody understands the time limit and the time that it takes to do this. And so one of the reasons why we're going to talk about this, and one reason why UTAC Compose can be a really useful tool for this, is that it does one thing that no teacher can do. And that is that when a student submits whatever they've written, they get instantaneous feedback. And there isn't anybody on the planet that can do it as quickly. Even if you're not always pleased with the feedback, they do get instant feedback. So they do get some instant charge on when they're writing. And that's one of the things that does that. I like the fact that Jody says teaching students to use a rubric is a really, really good idea. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about right now. 30 to 45 minutes a day, start with the basics, do a lot of things together. We read a passage, discuss it, fill out an outline, we write on that passage. So what's happening with what I'm seeing in the chat is that you're actually doing writing instruction. It's not just assigning something for students to write, and that's where that comes from. I will tell you that students who write in science are showing remarkable gains on their ELA tests as well as their math tests. So doing some stuff with science content is not only essential, but it's critical. One of the things I want to talk to you guys about is the fact that there are Utah core standards for student literacy. And we talk a lot about like what standards are. And student literacy, if you notice, it doesn't say in a certain subject. It literally says student literacy. And all of these areas that are listed on here about demonstrating independence and content knowledge and understanding the varying kinds of audience and, you know, valuing evidence and learning to use technology and digital media and understanding perspectives and cultures. The positive thing about this is if you are a third and higher teacher and you are using UTAC Compose consistently, I will tell you that you will hit all of these literacy standards throughout the entire school year. So it does give you a lot of bang for your buck with that. And so we're going to talk right now about some best practice suggestions of things to do. And I'm going to tell you these 6 things are the master's project that I wrote in 2010. With the help, I was an English 7th through 9th grade English and journalism teacher. And I taught in the classroom for 18 years. And out of that 18 years, 16 of it was using some kind of online writing tool. And so what happened is everything that I'm talking to you guys about today is classroom tested. My English department, we worked together to do some of the data collection on this, as well as this. But these 6 things, if you're doing this consistently, I promise you're going to see a marked improvement in writing in your students. And I want to add, as we go through some of this please feel free to type questions in the chat. I know I talk pretty fast, but we only have a couple hours. But please feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat or come off mute, be brave. And I will tell you, I really appreciate Sherry having her camera on because it is really hard sometimes, as you know, to do this to like blank screen. You have no idea who's out there. So please feel free to, stop me at any time. So it's all good. So we're going to cover all 6 of these things in detail. So I'm not going to go over this slide with you, but we're going to talk first about reviewing student writing data. One of the things that you want to think about with this is the only way that you know what kind of writers your students are is the DOVE factor. They need to write something. And they need to be able to start and look at their own writing and to start setting writing goals. You cannot be the judge, jury, and executioner of all things writing in your classroom. Just like we talk about, your students cannot read enough in class for them to become good readers. They can't write enough that you can expect to read or give feedback on every single thing that they write. And so there's a lot of teachers who use the excuse, well, I don't have time to do this. Your students should be writing anyway, and they should be starting to do some tracking of their own on their own. And there's a lot of tools that you can do to do this. Now, one thing that a lot of teachers aren't aware of, if you teach 3rd grade, you are the baseline for Utah Compose for the state. And we have access to Utah Compose through about 2028. So by the time we're done with this, we will have had Utah Compose in our state for free for every teacher, grades 3 through 12, in every content area for almost 20 years, which is almost unheard of for some of our contracts. So when you start using it as a 3rd grade teacher, particularly, and say the students move up and now in 5th grade, they can actually go back into their student portfolios and see what they wrote and submitted all the way back to 3rd grade. And that is a great place to start when you start talking about how do I know what kind of writers my students are. Now for K through 2, it's really important to start having students write. And one thing we've started encouraging teachers to do is keep writing portfolios and pass them up to the next grade teachers. You guys are a small district, and sometimes you have a lot of turnover, but sometimes the same students stay in your area or in the same schools. It's a good thing to provide them with their writing. Save it, put it in a folder, and let them look at it and go back and set writing goals. And that's one of the things that you want to do. Reviewing their writing from previous years, helping them to create their own writing goals, and develop methods so that they can track their own progress, because that's the key. Another critical piece of this is to teach both digital and analog note-taking strategies. With computerized based standardized tests, students have to be able to read, and they have to know how to use the note-taking features that are sometimes provided within WISE. There are places students can take notes. They also are all provided with a blank piece of paper, and your students need to know what to do with that paper. And remember that just teaching students to highlight something is not annotating, especially because they can't highlight once they're taking like a high stakes writing test. And we don't teach writing just because it's tested. We teach writing because we want our students to become effective communicators. And so that's one thing to think about. I used to teach my students how to fold that blank piece of paper to create graphic organizers. But one of the things I want to point out to you on this slide is if your students are over planning, if you notice one side of this, the students are just writing all kinds of things in there, and as opposed to the other side, and this comes from strategic writing, SRSD, the just right side, if you notice, they're learning certain ways to outline and plan their writing, because planning is one of the most effective ways for students to kind of teach your students to plan what they need to write and teach them how to review what they're looking at in order to incorporate it better in their writing. When we first started SAGE, to go back to the 2014 years, we actually did a range finding test all over the state. We wrote some SAGE-like prompts. We took them out to teachers. We had them split their classrooms in half did online writing, half did handwritten essays, because there was a lot of complaints about students couldn't type fast enough, and we did all of that. And we found out that the students who consistently typed their essays actually wrote more than the handwritten essays. So handwriting is not a barrier to them, typing is not necessarily the barrier that many teachers think it is. Secondly, we found out that we gave them stimulus material that they could look at, and the students who tended to who had been trained basically just to highlight information, put the least amount of evidence in their essays. So you need to teach them how to find that important information, textual evidence that they have to put in their essays. And one way to do that is to teach them both how to take notes analog and digitally. A couple things that I've been asked a lot of times, for whatever you're working on, we found that 3 working drafts per prompt is probably optimal for your students. And when we say working drafts, when you're using U2Compose, they may hit submit a lot of times within a writing period when you're working on it. I'm talking about the draft that you're going to have your students review, that you're going to review, that you're going to work with. They need 3 working drafts. The first one, of course, is basically the rough draft. It's their get your ideas out on paper. That's what the number one that you skim and scan that helps you start guiding some of your instruction. The second draft is the one where they're improving and based on the information that you've guided them with. And then the one that you're going to read and maybe provide additional feedback on or use to track is the third and final draft, which is really publishable. And now with so many places one-on-one, one thing that's cool about this is you can do an entire working draft. If you're writing every day, you probably could do this in about a week. I only had access to an actual computer lab 1 day a week. So my students did this every Wednesday. We went into the lab, we wrote once a week, and then on Thursdays we did something. Yes, Sherry, that is a great question. Does limiting their submissions effective? This is what I used to do. First drafts, I didn't worry about it at all, because you're going to have the kids that just hit submit. They want to see what their score is going to be. After that, sometimes I started to, I call it squirrel behavior, Sherry. Those kids that they want to type a sentence and hit submit and type a sentence and hit submit. If you start seeing a lot of that in your class, I would limit it. So when they all came in or when it's time to write, I would say, okay, guys, today I've limited everybody's submissions to 5 or whatever it is, right? So use your time wisely, okay? And that kind of stops to do that. And by limiting it, it really does work. And it also is effective if you do see, unfortunately, when you limit, you have to limit the whole class. I have put in an enhancement and asked that we could figure out a way that they could limit by student, so that if you do have those squirrels who kind of tend to just hit submit all over and over and over, that you could fix it. But right now that when you limit it, it's for the whole class. But I absolutely have found that to be effective once in a while. So that is a great question. Another thing to realize with this is if you want to see where your students kind of are, use the example essays and have them look at the example essays, particularly the really low, the ones that I consider to be really poor writing. Those are some of the best examples that you can use. And what's really cool about this is when you can use those example essays, you see everything from grades 3 through 11, 12. So you can actually kind of determine grade level by looking at some of those, and so can students. And the example essays, if you notice, everybody has different, they're grade banded, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so you can actually go in and see them and use them as examples that you don't have to worry that you're sharing writing or releasing personal student information. It's a really effective way to look at them. And that was my first lesson of the year. I used to give the very worst essay. I would find the worst example, copy it, because you can copy and paste these out, hand them to my students in groups and say, what are we going to do to fix this? And you would be surprised at the good writing conversations and the knowledge that your students gain from that. Because what's really cool is that most of the low scoring example essays, your students hopefully write better than that. And it does help them. It does help them kind of understand where to go from. They also provide some annotations that will help you guide some instruction. So if you're a new teacher or you're kind of unsure about teaching writing, because everybody has specialties. I mean, I'm not a math teacher for a reason. It does give you some annotations about, here's some suggestions that you might want to look at that you could use as an example. When I print the essays, though, I do not put the annotations on it. I just give them the essay. And if you look at this slide, this informational, my favorite free time activity, this entire essay is like 3 sentences long. And it's a really good one to start with because you can hand it to your students and say, what would you do to make this better? And they're always going to say, well, it needs to be longer. Well, what are you going to add to make it longer? And then the next thing to do is have them compare, if they've written anything, compare what they've done to an example essay to see what they want to do. And that starts that conversation. And it's a great way to really start helping students recognize that writing is their job and they don't need to depend completely on you telling them whether they're a good writer or not. Another thing that is really, I cannot stress the importance of this, having students hear their own writing. Now, a lot of elementary teachers have, whisper phones, those little phones that are made out of PVC pipe, and they're great. You just have to remember right now in our time of, well, I started doing this with H1N1, and we had to, you just have to make sure that you're keeping them clean. But every student has a whisper phone if they have 2 fingers. And the easiest thing to do, and I'm going to ask you to do this, you guys, and I'm not joking about it. I know you're all, wherever you are, I want you to hold up 2 fingers, hold up nice ones, just like this. And then in a minute, I'm going to have you plug your ears. And in a normal conversational tone, I want you to just say your first and last name and whatever grade you teach, okay? So at the count of 3, turn on your cameras, everybody. Let's see. When I did this in my junior high classroom, you guys, we called this celebrating your inner writing dork, because nobody believes you're going to have to do this. And yes, we actually did this. So we're all going to do it. Cameras on. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Sherry. Danielle. I know. Okay. Well, thanks. Okay. You're going to hold up 2 fingers like this. Okay. Put them in your ears. And then say your first and last name and the grade level you teach. And pay attention to what you hear. Okay. Oh, thanks, Miller. I'm sorry, Milford. I'm sorry you don't have a camera. That's okay. But anyway, do it together in a room and pay attention. Those of you, if you're in a room together, pay attention to what you hear around you as well. Okay. 1, 2, 3, go ahead. What do you hear? Somebody go ahead and pop off mute. Milford, since you guys don't have a camera, pop off mute. What did you guys hear when you did it? What do you hear? You hear your own voice, but louder. Exactly. And so what's really cool is, yeah, and see what's like Jody said, she could hear herself, but she couldn't hear the other people around her. And what's really cool about this, you guys, is if you remember, one of the things that's really important is, have you ever, when you're typing your own emails or you're typing something that's really important, think about how many times sometimes you change what you're writing because it sounds funny. Has anybody ever done that? When you're writing and you think about it, that doesn't sound right. And we use that term even though we're just typing, okay? That inner writing voice is really important for students to develop, okay? But they don't always hear what they want to say. And back when I was in college, I mean, I had a professor tell us that you should never put a comment on a student's paper unless you read it all the way through, and then go ahead and put comments on it. Nobody has time for that. I'll just be blunt. You just don't. But all students need to hear their writing. And one of the things about doing and making them read it from the beginning to the end out loud, and we would do this in a classroom all together at the same time, what happens with that is, the writing pet peeves where students start every single sentence with the same word, I, or and, or run-on sentences and things that are really simple that if they heard it, they would probably pick up on it. Doing read aloud edits and having the students do that solves a lot of those issues because they hear those choppy sentences and they hear the things that you need to fix. Same thing with as you're starting to give feedback. If you're giving the same feedback on more than 2 or 3 students, stop doing it and reteach it because literally you're just going to make yourself crazy because they just didn't get it and it's time to you start using examples and try to do that. And this read aloud edit, by doing this, you can do this in a whole classroom full of students. Using 2 fingers helps your students who tend to don't like that sound stimulation. It helps students with a little bit of auditory issues, helps them. The other reason why 2 fingers works is what happens with 2 fingers, and then you have to read it from the top to the bottom. The reason why that works is because the minute you find an error, you want to stop immediately and correct it. Has anybody ever know, you know how when you're reading along, you find a mistake, you want to stop, but you don't, that ruins the reading effectiveness from the beginning to the end. This is when students will catch the fact they're using the same words over and over and over. This is when they find out their organization is weird. Because when they're starting to read it out loud, if it's choppy or weird, a lot of students go, it sounds funny. And that's, you got them then, because now they want to know how to fix it, okay? And that's one of the reasons why the 2 fingers works, is because you can, it's really easy to monitor, for one thing. And the second thing is that it keeps them focused on reading their paper and not correcting their paper. Now, how I did this in my classroom, you guys, and I did this every single Thursday for 12 years. I promise. If you walked into my class, the first 10 minutes for 12 solid years, this is what my junior high kids were doing. We would do this at the beginning of every class, because we would write on Wednesdays, and we would do a lot of the stuff we're talking about today on Thursdays, because I only had a lab 1 day a week, and it was writing time when we were in the lab, and all of the writing instruction on Thursdays. So when I asked you how you did your writing instruction, that's how I did mine. I would dream to have had everybody have computers at all, have everybody have laptops in my classroom. That wasn't even a possibility before 2014. The one benefit of COVID is one-to-one computers. So that's the one thing that we did get. But one of the things that's really important about when you're doing this read aloud edit is you're going to notice that students will write in different lengths. Like you would have students that maybe wrote just a little bit, then you have students that write a lot, and then you have students that might write a whole bunch depending on what level they are. And it's really important for all students to be able to read from the beginning to the end without being interrupted and not having everybody in the class listen to them. So if you have like a microphone in your class, or you just have your teacher voice, I would tell my students when I first set this up that I would just start talking, and they didn't have to listen to what I was saying, but that I wanted everybody in the class to have the benefit of being able to read out loud without everybody listening to them. And if you're talking while other kids are reading, it makes them more comfortable. Now, I will tell you that my very last year I taught, I had a group of ninth graders who wrote so much that it would take too much time. And I used to put them in the hall to just read out loud, and then they would find their mistakes and do it. And so you keep your fingers in your ear, you read your essay to the end, and as soon as you're done, they pick up a pencil or a highlighter or whatever you're having them do. They can write anything that they want to fix that they heard or saw as they were writing, so that they understand that they are the editors and the controllers of their writing. Like, they've heard it, what do they need to fix? And most kids find something, even if it's, they use the small letter I over and over and over when they're typing it. All of those things are things that they can start to find, all right? And that's one of the things. You can also do this and guide them for certain things. Like when my students would use, because I didn't get to use Utah Compose in the class, I used Utah Write, same company. When my students would do this, as I was stapling their essays and looking at them the day before, I would find patterns. And sometimes if I saw lots and lots of the same pattern, when my students were doing their read aloud edits, I would tell them, you know what, I noticed a lot of you have started lots of your sentences with the same word. I want you to pay attention as you're reading your essays out loud. What are the first words in your sentences? And then we would guide it and do some other things with it afterwards. But by doing it that way, you're not having to write all the comments over and over and over. And it's showing them that they are responsible for the writing and their writing learning. So it's a really effective technique. If you don't have time to do something every week, like there were some Thursdays I had 2 other things to do. We would do read aloud edits, and I would have them track. And that would be all we would do. But then, before we went back into the lab, we would also do our writing instruction. So when people ask me about that, that's how I structured it. And remember, I had about 200 students. Now, here's the other key where highlighters are really effective. And you don't have to necessarily just highlighters. You can use colored pencils or crayons for that matter. But one key to using this as a formative writing tool is student revision and editing, okay? And so you need to teach your kids how to do this with guided highlighting. And these are just the suggestions that we do. And by the way, I will add, because everybody always wants to know, I am sending this to Brian and Jody to share with everybody who attended today. So you will get a copy of the PowerPoint as well as as electronic copies of some of the tracking sheets and the rubrics and stuff. So you don't have to worry about remembering all the colors. But I will tell you with these, I first based this on Step Up to Writing, the green, yellow, and pink. And then from there, I adapted it out and started using different things. One of the most important things that I can tell you to think about right now is I want you to think about writing pet peeves, things that make you crazy. Like you're just like, I just can't look at this one more time. Pretty much everyone has one. I will share mine. If you have the same one, just type +1 in there. Students who would do the there, and there, and two, and it's, all the, the basic words that are, I call them the multiplication words of English, they would use the wrong there over and over. Your and your was a big one. What are some of yours? The small letter I are some of the ones I've heard. Some other ones that you just can't stand it. Feel free to type them in the chat. Here's another one. I'm in my essay, I'm going to tell you about, or in conclusion, the end, or ending your essays with, I hope you liked what I was telling you about, poor conclusions, poor intros, all of those kind of things are really, really annoying. Teach those first. And as the longer you teach, you'll have some of those that you're like, I just can't stand this anymore. So do those first. If you start teaching your pet peeves, and you can have a lot of fun with this, there's books about things that irritate people, have some fun with it. I learned that I didn't know why I would make myself suffer through the whole first term of the year being frustrated with your and it's. I remember I taught 7th and 9th graders. They would drive me crazy. So I started out the school year with those. And I would say, it's time to learn these, and we would talk about that. And did 100% of my students remember all the time? No, I wish. That would have been magical. But it did work oftentimes to kind of help, and it makes looking and giving feedback and helping students understand about feedback much more effective. So you can start with that. But the colors are really important. I didn't do that. You don't do all of them with every essay. You select and choose based on some of your instructional goals, where your students are writing. But if you notice, like green, thinking go, first words and sentences, can they find their claim or their thesis statements? Where are their hooks? If we're talking about hook sentences or introductions, having them go into their own essays and highlight those in green makes them understand, wait a minute, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or this is where I can't find. When they can't find a claim, then they write a note on their papers, or they can work with partners. What is your claim for your essay? Or whatever you're trying to do, that first thing helps them start to understand. Pink, these are just samples that I did, like pink, think, stop, because we love it when our students show thinking. So things like, can you find where you use some textual evidence with an example in your essay? Especially if you're working on textual evidence and elaboration, can they find examples where they elaborated on something they just might have cut and paste from the summary? Helping them see that visually helps a lot. And those are really effective strategies that you can do as a whole class. It's easy to monitor this because everybody's holding a blue or purple or whatever highlighter in their hands. And you can walk around and see, and yes, students sometimes highlight the wrong things, but they highlight, and then you have them immediately with a pencil or a pen, write down something else that they want to change it, and then you collect the drafts. So that the next time they go into the lab, or whenever they're going to type their essays, and by the way, if they're doing this like you're doing this with Chromebooks, and they're doing this all electronically, they need to have a piece of paper where they're actually writing down what they're going to change. And you collect those so that the next time they work on that draft, you can hand that back to them and say, remember, this is where you start. Because especially with drafting, you know how students do the, I'm done because I've done it once? A lot of times it's because they don't know where to start with the draft. But if you've already guided them to, this is where we're going to start next time, this is why we revise and re-edit our writing, it gives them some place to go, and it helps them understand exactly where that works. And that's why User Compose works well. I always recommend, even if you're using Chromebooks, to print one draft of the essay. And yes, you have to print them yourselves and staple them and let them work with one draft that is actually a hard copy. And the reason is that it makes it really real for them to be able to see and highlight and do that. And that's, you know, a personal choice and maybe, you know, a monetary thing, you know, depending on how much ink and stuff. But I will tell you that that is one of the best ways that they can do it and see it, because it becomes real when it's in their plan. And it's really hard, especially for younger students, to edit online. It's hard for adults. You know, most adults, many adults still print out what they're working on and then edit and then still hand it back. So you want to think about that. You don't have to do that, but at least one draft, I highly recommend that you should give them one. Some teachers prefer it to be the final draft, so like the third one, that they've already done all of the work ahead of time and now you're just reviewing it and you can put your notes, your own notes, give it back to them. Or the second draft is the one that I like the best to print, because if the first draft is really rough, the second draft is going to show a lot more of the work that you've been working on together. And that's the one that I would have them print and highlight and work on, so that, and give it back to them, so that when they do their third draft, final draft, this is where you can really see where it's ready to be published. Anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Feel free to pop off mute. We're not a very big group. Wilford, without your cameras, anybody there have any questions? You're a group, so feel free to share. Everybody still awake? Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, this is one of the most critical pieces of this, and that is learning to track their progress. And I have two examples here, the little student graph. If you actually Google student self-monitoring, you are going to find literally hundreds of examples that teachers have already created to help students track progress when they're working on things. It's really amazing how many there are. The one that says Utah Compose Essay Tracker on this is actually part of my master's project, and this is what we had our students do, okay? Now, they don't fill this out every single time they hit submit. They do this with the 3 working drafts, okay? And the 3 working drafts, the essay title, I would just tell them what it was. A lot of times it's just an abbreviation of whatever the link is that they hit. You notice there's a place for the date, what their total score is, whatever they got out of 5. And then we added the last 2 columns for textual evidence and content accuracy. Those have to be hand scored by teachers. You can choose to use those or not, but we added those in because sometimes we would give the kids the rubrics and have them grade each other on where they were using textual evidence and content accuracy. The reason I show you the tracking sheet after that guided highlighting is because a lot of the stuff that kids can highlight comes directly into this tracker. And I want to make sure that everybody understands formative assessment is not about the score. It's about the process. So a lot of kids focus all the time on what did you get out of 30? That's the big thing. And when you first start using online writing, it doesn't matter what program you use or what, all they care about at first is the score. It's kind of a game. But if all you're having your students do is just type an essay, hit submit and move on, and that counts as your writing, they're not going to make very much progress unless they're self-motivated and want to do that. So you have to do all of these other things. And with tracking, one of the things that you will find happens with this is like their first draft, they just write down whatever they got off of their essay drafts. And I'll show you a sample one. And then with the second draft, the second working draft, they fill in the scores again. And it happens so rarely. There's no student I've ever seen who doesn't improve somewhere in organization, development, style, word choice, sentence structure, or conventions between the first draft and the second draft. And anytime they do that, you have them highlight where they improved. And then you have them write down and tell you what they did. So they actually have to look at their first draft and they have to look at their second draft. And you can do this easily. If you have Chromebooks, have them look at draft 1 and have them click on draft 2. And they can look and see. And this is, by the way, the bonus is sometimes they may just parrot back things that you told them, but at least you know they listened to something you said. But also, it helps them start to understand that writing is really an incremental process, and it helps build their confidence that when they actually do these multiple drafts, magical things actually happen. And the thing I love the most now, which I didn't have when I was still using this actively in my classroom, is that now the essay points go to the decimal. So you can have students improve to say 1.5 to 1.6, but it's still an improvement. And it's enough for them to actually reflect and think about it. And it becomes their job. For those of you who've never used Utah Compose, or for those of you who are new writing instructors, and for early elementary to littles, one of the main places that you will see marked improvement in writing is work on word choice. Because one of the things that happens is our students want to write like they speak. And, you know, like many teachers, I had one have word graveyards where we get rid of some of those words. Now, obviously, this is grade level dependent, but, you know, at a certain point, students need to learn to use words that are different than nice, fun, pretty, cool, bad, ugly, and find other words to use. And just by focusing on having them go through and find some words that they're using over and over and over, and improving their vocabularies, it makes your vocabulary lessons embed in your work, as well as helps them understand that, you know, coming up with better sentences and better word choice is their job. Organization and developing ideas is another one that's really common. Obviously, sentence structure. I mean, conventions, I would not focus on conventions to start with, because what it does is it kind of reinforces the idea that writing is all about conventions. It's only about spelling and punctuation and capitalization, and it's not about purpose and ideas. And that is one of the things we're trying to get away from a little bit with students, because they need to make this work. And so I hope that helps you understand a little bit about that. Okay, so one of the things with your doing, and hopefully we won't have to do any more remote learning, but one of the things you do want to do, even with remote, even in person, is make sure your students know how to access their writing portfolios. You may have to create PDF versions of handouts to give to students as well, but in person, if you teach multiple grade levels, and I did, I bought colored folders, and I color coded. My first period class was yellow, and my second period class was blue, and it was just easier to remember whose folders went what when I was handing things out. I used whatever I put in writing portfolios, and I did give these to the students at the very end of the school year, all their tracking sheets. And most of the time, by the way, if you're using what I did, which was 7 prompts through the year, and they wrote 3 times on a prompt, 1 tracking sheet front and back covered them for the whole school year. Because at a certain point, we kind of cut back on writing instruction because we had tested season in spring. And so that's one thing to remember, but you could use as many as you want. Copies of their working drafts. Student graphic organizers are critical. So anything you're using to help them with that. Student writing rubrics, you will get copies of them. I went through and scored a ton of Utah Compose essays and copied all of the feedback that comes from level 1 to 5 onto one rubric. And I will be sending those along with you that you can have your students look at. Now, if you're teaching grades 3, 4, 5, 3 and 4 for sure, you may want to look and you may have to modify it, but you will be able to, because I'm sending you the things the way to do that. But there's also certain things. Self-reflections are really common. I have my students, the last essay they wrote at the end of every term was they would actually go back and look at all their writing and talk about how they improved, where their strengths were, and then what they wanted to do to set goals for the next time. Makes a great prompt, okay? So where do you begin with this? All right, first of all, like we said, you need to pre-assess your student writing. One of the things that I recommend you do is have your students write by hand or type in Word, and don't use Utah Compose to start with this. You've already, we're halfway through the school year almost. It's a little bit different, but this is one of the things that you want to think about. But the key here is number 3 and 4, and now that should say 5. I've got a typo in this, I didn't realize it. That's what happens when you read stuff out loud, right? Review their own writing to evaluate their strengths and weaknesses. And yes, you kind of have to guide them with this a little bit. Focus first on message and purpose, and minimize your focus on editing. And editing is the simplest part. That's the easiest thing for us to focus on. Think how many times You've heard people say, I grade for content, and when you got a paper back, it was literally any spelling error or sentence structure problem that you had with capitalization. And then using your pre-assessment, they set their goals for improving their writing. And it can't be like for the whole year, I want to be a better writer. It needs to be for about the next month. What are you going to be working on? And you can help guide these goals a little bit with your instructional goals as well, or things, weaknesses or strengths that you see, and comment on the strengths that you see with your students as writers. Like, this is where we're doing really well, and I think this is where we need to work and improve a little bit. It gives them somewhere to go. Nobody likes, and that's why, like with peer review, when you're using peer review, you need to teach your students to ask for the feedback that they want, so that you don't just see, I wish you were a better speller, or this is awesome, okay? And those are the kind of things that you need to think about when you're working on it, okay? You can also do this, by the way, as a group. You can actually, like we were talking about earlier, make sure you print the connected stimulus material so they can use it when they're reviewing it. And in pairs of groups of 4, have them write and talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the writing. And again, though, you're going to focus on message and purpose, and then review one of your own essays and compare it. So you can do it in 2 ways, or you can do both of these things. They're all really effective strategies, okay? Now, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and this can be really overwhelming when you first start doing this with students. And now that we're moving as a state to personalized competency-based learning, this isn't something that only junior high and high school students are going to be doing. This is something that we're starting with it at actually pre-K, but definitely kindergarten. So students need to start learning how to monitor their own learning. And so one way that you might want to think about doing this is using what are called single point rubrics. This simplifies this process and is a strategy that is really useful for pretty much everyone. So one of the things you want to think about with single point rubrics is it does help students learn to self-assess themselves, especially if you're focusing on success criteria and learning targets. It helps them explain their thinking, so it's improving their metacognition, and it also increases motivation and growth mindset because they start to really own their own learning, and they start to learn what they need to do to improve without somebody standing over them and telling them all the time. And it's a really effective strategy that works really, really well. It also provides for personalized learning, because when students fill these out, it's one of the best formative assessment tools out there. You can look and see how students have completed their single point rubrics to say, wait a minute, this is where this student really feels like they're struggling, or I'm seeing this struggle, so that you can work one-on-one or in groups with students to help them help. The other thing about this is that it focuses the attention on feedback before you give them grades, because you're looking at feedback loops. Sometimes you have them do it for themselves. Sometimes they do it with a peer. Sometimes you do fill one out with them. It gives that peer feedback. It improves because the rubric guides the feedback that they're supposed to be giving. And the teacher feedback focuses on process, on performance, and on product. So you're not focusing on the student. Do they understand the process? Do they understand what you wanted, asked them to do? And what does the final product look like? So it gives you something. And if you notice, this is all before a grade. You don't grade the rubrics. You don't even grade the process. You grade what they're doing afterwards. Here's an example of this. And this one I took from Know Your Terms about single point rubrics. This is like a single point rubric for breakfast and bed. And if you notice, one side says concerns or areas that need work. The other side says advanced or evidence of exceeding the standards. And then the criteria is in the middle. So here it's a single point rubric because it's just, we're going to talk about these 3 things: food, presentation, and comfort. And all of this is exactly there. And so you can even simplify this down and give them one level. Maybe you just want to talk about the food, so that where do they need to do work and where do they do better. And if you notice, the criteria you set, and you can do this as a class even to set some of the success criteria. You can use single point rubrics, by the way, with anything, not just writing. You can have them do this with all kinds of topics. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it today, because we give students rubrics sometimes and it's overwhelming to them because there's just so much on them. have them focus and narrow the focus and have them fill these out. Then you can do this, by the way, with even having them put it in 3 pieces of paper. So you're not having to make a lot of copies. If you just have them list in the middle what the criteria was, real briefly, like food, presentation, comfort. They don't have to know all this. You may be showing that, but you know what you assigned, and then they write down what they wanted to look at. So an example of one, like you can do it with glows and grows, strong aspects of your work, or how can you strengthen your work? So the outcome or the indicators, like a description of grade level mastery. And if you notice, I gave 3 criteria. 3 is good. Sometimes you might have only 1, you might have 2, but having students actually complete this with strong aspects of their work, which you could have them fill this out right after they did the read aloud edit. Where were your strengths and what are you going to strengthen? And you collect these, you review them, you can see where kids are kind of monitoring themselves. And when you give them back the next time they're going to be working on their writing, for example, they have some place that, oh, this is what I wanted to remember to work on. And it gives them a starting point, okay? For example, if you were going to do this presentation, sorry, it's really slow today. If I was going to give you a one for this one, it would be on engagement, application, and clarity. And if you, and if we were in person, I might have given you this rubric and had you use this for me as feedback. But you can see how you can look and say, what are some things that you felt? What are some things, if you notice, some of these are about you and some of these are perhaps about the presentation. But that is a single point rubric, and they work fantastic. And you can Google them as well as I will give you a sample. Now, the main thing that I want to emphasize with this, you guys, is that effective practice means practice. Students need to write, and they need to write every day, and they need to write in all content areas, and they need to write more than you can ever read yourself. So you need to everybody has to develop some strategies for helping them track. How are you giving them feedback? How are they giving themselves feedback? How are you doing peer feedback? But that's part of this, because really this is the writing process. You draft, you revise, you edit, repeat. And that's what happens all the time. And that's why we end up not teaching writing, because it becomes too much when we think we have to give all the feedback. And that is not true. So that is one of the things that I wanted to go ahead and talk about. Those are the 6 best things that you can possibly do. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Utah Compose for the last hour. Does anybody have any questions about using writing for best practice? Feel free to type them in the chat, guys, and I am looking to see if anybody has any questions that have come up. Because we're going to look kind of at Utah Compose now as some of the enhancements and some of the things that a lot of teachers aren't even aware of there. And feel free, if you're sitting at your desk, go ahead and take a minute and stand up and stretch for a second if you've been sitting for a while. Feel free to stand up for 1 second. For about 30 seconds, we'll take a quick, 30-second break. Feel free to stretch. You got about 15 seconds, I'll just warn you, and then we're going to go ahead and continue. Okay, so let's talk about Utah Compose. First of all, there are some enhancements that have happened over the last couple of years that many teachers aren't aware of. Some of them you are. First of all, you may have noticed that when you log in now to Utah Compose, you have a teacher modeling account. You can log in, it'll say as a teacher or as a student. You can now log in as a student and actually and do everything that your students are doing in front of the class to help guide their instruction. You can also add another teacher to your class. If you work in content level teams or you have somebody that works with you, you can add another teacher to your course and then they have access and can see your student reports the same as everyone else. You can also print multiple essays at once now, which is really awesome, especially if you're using Chromebooks and you just want to print the last draft that your students wrote so that you can provide them hard copies. You can just go to the Home tab, hit Writing History, multi-select all the students and hit Print, and it will print all the essays. Back in the day, I used to have to print each one by one, or I would just have my students submit and print them for me. You can now assign one prompt to multiple classes at the same time. You can require students to complete a graphic organizer that are within the program. You can also prevent essay copy and paste so that students can't just take the information out of the stimulus material and just copy and paste it into their essays. One thing I will warn you about is that if you enable that, they also can't copy and paste within their essays. So if you're having them move paragraphs or anything, you'll have to turn that back off so that they can do that. You can assign lessons for students to work on. You can also hide the scores so that students can't see what their scores are, which is really useful if you want to just focus on, we're just going to write today and we're not going to worry what score. And that could work. I mean, Sherry, when you asked about, limiting submissions, that is also a way to look at it too. You can have them hide the score so they're not focusing so much on what score they're getting. They've updated peer review, and now there's even report sharing with your administrators. Your students can now highlight and format text within a graphic organizer. The revision screens are split, so they're side by side now. It also shows their writing analysis. They can add essay titles. There's a little citation box, and there's also rich text formatting that allows them to go ahead and use what they need to do. So there's a lot of different enhancements that are out there, and I'm just talking at you about them, but I'll show you. One of the most frustrating things about using Utah Compose is registering for your account. And you absolutely have to do this exactly how this slide shows you, or you will not be able to register your account. I will tell you the two things that are most important. First of all, you have to use the exact name that's in your Cactus record. So if you're like Rebecca and you typed in your account as Becky, it will not allow you to register. And if you've gotten married or divorced and you've changed your last name, but you haven't updated your Cactus record, you have to use what's in your Cactus record because that's how it ties your students to each other. But the most common error is the fact that you have to multiply your social security number by itself. So you actually are typing like 5 times 7 times 2 times 1 times 8. And you need to use a calculator. And you need to check your math and do it more than once to make sure you get the same product twice and ignore the zeros, okay? And when you enter that information, don't use the commas. And I'm saying this out loud because I cannot tell you how many emails I've had to help teachers do this because they're not reading the instructions, and it's just frustrating. So use a calculator, do it more than once, make sure you get the same number, and make sure, by the way, you know your social security number. Because believe it or not, some people are typing the wrong social security number and it won't, and I don't have access to that. So that's one of the things you want to check as well. But those are the most important things to make sure you register. And I don't know, based on who's out here, how many of you have Utah Compose accounts. I can look it up and tell you, but if you're struggling to get it registered, just send me an email, and my contact information is at the end of this as well. And that's just copying it. Now students, just so you know, students' accounts are populated by UTREX, which is the data exchange that comes from your school's SIS program. You cannot add students manually to Utah Compose. They always will log in with their SSID, their state student ID number, which is 7 digits, as their username and password with 3 digits in front of it. And for those of you who teach 3rd grade and think that's a lot of numbers, it's the exact same length as a phone number. So teach it to them with a phone number. Once they log in, they are prompted to create a new password. Because when they first log in, it's just their SSID number and then their SSID number again. And once they log in, it's going to say you need to create a new password. One of the things that we highly recommend you do is create, as a school, a plan for student passwords for Utah Compose. And one of the best things that you can use are your district school lunch numbers as passwords. So for 3rd grade, they use just their school lunch ID numbers. For fourth grade, it's their student ID number with the letter A either in front or behind it. You decide. For fifth grade, it's their school lunch number with the letter B in front or behind it, and so on. And the reason being is that to protect student data privacy, you are not allowed to email student passwords at all. And so in order to, if a student is working on something at home and you get one of those, I don't remember my password emails, unless you want to call your student, an easy way to do that is to just tell them, remember it's your school lunch number with the letter A in front or whatever it is. And that is one way to do that. Another thing that you need to do is you can change student passwords from the Students tab in Utah Compose. And you will be able to, you can always have access to them. So if your students say, I don't remember my password, just click on the Students tab and find it for them. And they do, they will change their passwords and claim they don't know what it is, and you can go in and fix them. And don't be surprised sometimes at what they pick as passwords. It can be sometimes a shocking moment for some people. The other thing that you want to remember, and this is, we cannot stress this enough, do not use a classroom password. Do not say, well, it's so much easier for me to just make, they type in with their SSID numbers and our password's going to be butterfly, or it's going to be my last name, or it's going to be whatever it is. That actually violates student data privacy rules. And so don't do it because that's just, it's not, you're just not allowed to do that. Because you want to send a message to your students that passwords are private and they need to be protected. On the Home tab, when you first log in, like I said, you're going to see yourself. You can sign in as a teacher or sign in as a student. So you can now actually model this right in front of the classroom and do it right with them. There are simplified notifications now up in the corner. You're going to notice up in the corner there's a little bell. And if your students have sent you a note, or if an administrator has sent you a note requesting access to your student scores, and they have to ask first. They can't just get them from the program because this is teacher-based. That's what you click on, and then you can say yes or no. But that little bell, when you first log in, you're going to see this little bell. If you see numbers on it, click on it, and it will give you all your messages. Okay. The notification, if you notice, like when an administrator, like if they ask for your information, they also get a notification that you said yes, that they can look at your student reports. So if you ever have principals or you're working on this across grade levels or something like that, and somebody wants all your reports, it may be simpler for an administrator to print them and just bring them to your meeting than to have everybody printing multiple things. That's a decision you need to make. Another thing that you can do is you can change your course name. Some teachers like to change the name of their course to just say like Mrs. Rathke's third grade or something like that. And this is also, when you click on edit, is how you add a teacher to your course. And you can also, if you're teaching an advanced class, you can change the scoring algorithm for your entire class all at once, which means that say you have a group of pretty advanced third graders who are scoring really high and they're starting to kind of, you're feeling like it's the feedback they're getting is not, they need better or more advanced feedback. You can go in and change the scoring algorithm to grade them at the 5th, 6th level or the 7th, 8th level. By the same token, if you have a population of students that are struggling and you want to give them, you want to have them work more perhaps at their level, don't keep them there all year. You can lower the grade level as well. Now, if you teach third and fourth is the lowest it goes. It will not adjust up, but that's one of the things that you want to remember, that you can do it for the whole class. You can also do it for individual students as well. So if you have some students in your class that you just want to do, you can also go and just change it individually as well. And one thing to remember about this is that, remember, it is, you cannot violate fate by letting your special ed students work below grade level for the entire school year. That is not appropriate, but it is appropriate to help them as they start to move on. And the most important thing is the students don't know that you've done this unless you tell them. Now, when you look at reports, you will see asterisk next to their name, and so you'll know that that you've done this. You can add another teacher. For those of you who are working, some elementary schools have kind of gone to a middle school model where one teacher is like the writing teacher and another teacher is like teaches all the science. And you want to, you need to go, you can go in, and if they have a Utah Compose registered account, they can go in and add that teacher to, you can go in and add that teacher, and then they can see they can see your reports, you can see their reports, and the students can work on it. This works really well if you have resource teachers who you do some pull out. That's a really effective way that the students aren't necessarily assigned to them as a course. They just work with students on a limited basis in pull out situations. I highly recommend everybody get an account and go ahead and add them and do that. And so that's one of the ways that you can do that. But you can only do that with registered teachers within your school. You can, this is how you change the scoring algorithm. You hit edit. You can just hit under student writing history. This is how you can multi-select your print. I'm just showing you a couple of things really quick. The students tab is really important because this is how a lot of teachers aren't even aware that you can see this. You click on students, by the way, and if you hover your cursor right over the little dots, you'll see what their passwords are. And if you will need to change a student password, you just click edit. That's the same thing if you're going to adjust the scoring thing, you click edit. It brings up a score, you select the student, you click edit. Sorry, I'm just showing you a lot of different ways because I'm going to send this to you so you can see it. And then you get a screen that looks just like this. You can change the scoring level. Here's the grade. You'll see the grade level that's assigned to the student. This is where you can change the scoring. This is where you can reset a student's password, all on the same place under the Students tab. But additionally, if you just want to see what their password is, like a student comes up and goes, I can't remember what it is, if you hover over these dots, you will see their passwords, and then you can just tell them what it is. And that's basically how that works. If you're going to change the scoring algorithm for the entire class, you do that from the home screen, and then you just go in and do exactly the same thing. We don't recommend you do this for extended periods, but it's really useful for honor students or for advanced classes to make it go up. Under the lessons tab, just so you know, the lessons are arranged by grade level. They can access their lessons while they're composing their essays. So if a student is hitting submit a lot of times, every single time, and some teachers aren't aware of this, as soon as a student hits submit, not only do they get their instant feedback, but it will also, based on what they just typed, give them lesson suggestions for what they need to be working on. And it will highlight and say to them, this may be an area you want to work on. So if you do have those squirrels sometimes that are hitting submit a lot of times, you can slow them down and say, okay, what I want you to do is you're going to click and work on this lesson. Most of the lessons are designed to take about 6 minutes. So you can build that into your thing as well. And there's also read aloud available, which is really useful if you're trying to work with your students a little bit on getting used to listening and working at the same time, which is, by the way, something they have to get used to with standardized testing. That's another way that they can get a little bit of practicing as well. You can also assign lessons to both individual students or to an entire class. Like if you're going to have a sub, it's a great thing to do that with your things. Have the students go in and work on word choice today and then have them do some writing. The lessons, by the way, show you how to assign. You can select the difficulty level. You can select the lesson category. And that's basically how you do it. And if you can actually go in and assign different lessons for each student individually as well by clicking on the boxes. One thing, this is where if you've never seen it before or haven't paid really close attention, once a student hits submit, this is the feedback that shows up on their essay. And these are the scores that you would put on your tracking sheets. It will tell them it gives them some evaluation. It will tell them, and it will show them, gives them a little bit of feedback. And then whatever's highlighted in red are lessons that the students can go ahead and work on. And that is a great way to go ahead and click on those and have them work on theirs in specific areas. They're really useful because if you have parents that ask if there's a way to help their students improve, having them work with their students on the lessons is a really great thing. It will not give them a score. It only records how much time they work on it because they're truly formative. Under the reports tab, there's a lot of powerful information in there. If you've ever wanted to look to see how your students are doing as a class under traits and under scores, you can actually print for each essay. You can go in and look at your averages. The progress button is really good because you can actually put this up. We won't have any PI, it doesn't have any student information. It just shows how how your class is progressing with writing. And it's a great way to use that and look at that as well. This is what it reports. This is where if you're looking at student rating data, if you notice, you can see from different years, you can actually go and look in different years to see where your class are. It kind of gives you some information about maybe your instruction or where your class is for right now. Oh, how to add a teacher. Sherry, to add a teacher, I'm going to just click back for a second, guys. To add a teacher, you have to click on, when you're in the home screen, click edit. Click this little button right here. And then down in the corner, you should see add an existing teacher. Can you see it? Awesome. Okay, no worries. I appreciate you asking the question. And I know this is always I hate having to click through this. Normally doing this in person, you guys would be much happier. Okay, prompts tab. In the prompts tab, you guys, this really is the advanced option. The prompts tab almost is the dashboard for the entire program for what you do with prompts. And so it's really important that you understand the advanced options feature, which a lot of teachers aren't even aware is there. Within advanced options, you can require your students to have to use a graphic organizer, and you can assign the one they have to use. You can set a timer or disable it entirely. Using a timer sometimes is effective if it's getting closer and closer, like 5th and 8th grade teachers, the closer it gets to like the RISE writing test. Some teachers start timing them a little bit. It's important for your students to understand that they need to be able to write a complete rough draft essay in about an hour. And so it's useful to set a timer once in a while and have them practice. By the time they're working on their 3rd draft, I used to give my kids about 30 minutes. Because by the time they're on their 3rd draft, they've already done a lot of work with it, and a lot of, it's just doing the final polish on it. You can add how many times a student can resubmit an essay. The system automatically defaults to 30, by the way. You can have them format an essay. I would probably not enable that unless you want, because once an essay is formatted and they hit submit, they can't go in and fix it. Formatting means it's the final draft, and they can't go, the only way that they can work on an essay if you enable formatting and they hit submit is they have to literally copy and paste the whole thing, go back into the prompt again and start over. So that's one of the things. It's disabled as the default. And so unless you do that, you can require your students to put a title on their essay. If you're working on titles, it's a great thing to do. You can require your students to list their sources. Now, this doesn't do this in MLA. You don't have to worry about MLA format or something, but it's really useful for students to start paying attention to if they're pulling information from 2 or 3 sources, where did they get that information from, and listing it. It does help them start to recognize that you have to give credit. And obviously within the document, it's much better to do that, but it's also a way to, it's an extra reminder. The spelling and grammar feedback, one of the best things I've seen teachers do is not count grammar or spelling till students have submitted about 15 times. Depending on how much, because students often submit 4 or 5 or 6 times, but 12 times, not that you're saying that grammar and spelling doesn't count, but if you're truly trying to get your students to focus, say, on organization or word choice or style, having them, the spelling errors, students, it's hard to ignore those because they highlight in red. And we all know, and grammar errors highlight in green. So it's hard for them to see, but delete them and get rid of it. It's a really useful way to do that. And then you can just have them go on. You can add specialized vocabulary lists. If you're working on something, especially if you're typing, say, some essays that you're using from literature, or you're using some scientific terms that you're worried may highlight as spelling errors, you can add those words to the specialized vocabulary list and all of that other stuff. And this is where you actually do that, is you click on advanced options under prompts. and do that. You can also add your own prompts. And you can also do the same thing with advanced options and access all of that. That is a really important feature. Advanced options really helps a lot. The one thing that I want to remind you about when you're talking about prompts is the title is the link that your students will type on. And so it will highlight in red. And I highly recommend that you give it an actual title. Don't call it like Mrs. Rathke's third essay, because when they go look back, say next year you want to go back in, you're like, what was that third essay? Give it a title so that you can remember what it was you assigned your students. And remember, that's what they're going to click on as the link, so it makes sense. The description is the prompt, and it's important that your students understand, that you give them all the instruction. Don't just say, write about this, use whatever information I gave. Like, that is the actual prompt that you want them. This is when you're going to give them any instruction. You have to select the genre so that it corrects to the correct rubric. And if you're working as a grade level team, you can go ahead and select yes to enable the prompt for all the students and to allow other teachers in your school to use it. Oftentimes we shared prompts as a department all the time, and it was a great way for us to say, I'm going to use this one, I like this one, and all of that. It's a very useful and tool to use. You can assign prompts now to multiple courses when you click on the little course button in Enabled. And so you can actually click and say, do you teach multiple courses? You can just say yes, and then it adds them. And so they know that you don't have to copy and paste it in like you used to. This is how you assign a graphic organizer. I'm not going to go over that to you, but when you're doing this, the teacher view looks like this. You just have a list of them. So if you want to know what they look like for students, click on student view. You'll notice that it actually shows the graphic organizer, and you can select the one that you want them to use or not. I have to be honest with you, I didn't use a lot of pre-printed graphic organizers when I taught writing. I used lots and lots. I taught my kids what to do with that plain paper that they always had, so that they always had a way to plan, whether I had gone to the copy machine or not. But that is obviously a choice. I did like these to use for writing, for a reading. I used a lot of them for reading when they were trying to find information out of documents. The copy and paste restrictions, it does prevent direct plagiarism by students. You have to set it per prompt. And it can be adjusted between writing sessions. So say on the first one, you don't want your kids copy and pasting giant bits of stimulus material in, you can disable it. You can enable it that they can't use it. Enabling means they can't copy and paste. Disabling it means they can, okay? It is automatically disabled. Peer review, they've updated peer review a little bit by giving you questions. And you can go in and select up to 60 of these questions for students to answer about other people's essays. If you would like to, these are a little bit wordy. I wish that they were written in a little bit simpler language, especially for our early elementary students, but it does give you a guide that you could use and help them a little bit with it. It's also really important for students to use the academic language and vocabulary for writing as well. But remember, that's also grade level specific. In the student view, just so you know, I wanted to show you, like we were talking about split screen revision. If you've used the program, you've seen this. If you haven't, this is one of the best things that they've added in, and that is that we now have split screen revision. So their prior essay shows up on the left, and what they're working on shows up on the right. So they can actually see it side by side. So as they're working out, they used to have to scroll up and down. Now it's side by side, so it saves them a lot of time, and it's a lot less frustrating not having to do that. And they can even turn off the spelling and grammar and just say, I don't want to look at that right now while they're working. And same thing with the graphic organizers now. The graphic organizer will show up on one side and their draft on the other side, so that you're actually teaching them, if they're going to take the time to fill out and complete a graphic organizer, how they're using it to apply into the writing. And this is something that is a really good feature as a teacher to use your student side for, is to actually show them, like, fill out the graphic organizer using the stimulus material, and then show them how you would take that information and put it actually into their writing. That is a really effective lesson, one you'll have to do more than once. So that's basically the program, guys. The one thing we just want to let you know is that the students write at least 20 minutes a day for 10 days in a row, at least 8 times a year between 4th and 9th grade. They end up writing an additional 160 hours. That is a lot of writing time. And considering that by the time they hit 10th grade, they're now preparing for college or their post-secondary education or their life, learning to write is and how much writing they do is a really essential piece. And I want you to leave you with this question. We judge people by the way they write. And it's really important that students understand that. And, we joke a lot or we tease a lot about, well, they write in text and they do things. But then you get an email that is almost unreadable from somebody who's a professional, or you do the parent thing, Apple meet the tree. It's a really important thing for students to understand that they really are judged by the way that they write. And it's an important skill that they need to learn as well. It's not something that you can just ignore and move on. So what I would like you guys to do is fill out this exit ticket today. And everybody needs to fill this out. So hopefully you're in Nearpod, and Emily, you can type the code back in. I would like you to tell me what was the most surprising thing you've learned in today's session, what's the most important thing you've learned, and how you're going to apply what you've learned today in your own work as an educator. And you're just going to go ahead and type that in that little box at the bottom of the screen and hit post for me. Okay. And this is a good way for us to go ahead and share some of the stuff that people have learned. And if you have any questions, feel free to type those also in the chat. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Now, the good news is, you guys, is your names are hidden, so you don't have to worry that you're typing something that you're going to give away. You only have about 250 characters. So just type. You can pick one of the 3. I had your names hidden. There, I'm hiding your name. Sorry, I thought they were hidden. Yeah, the daily writing thing, you guys, I can't emphasize enough for you that 30 minutes, and by the way, that's starting at the kindergarten level. One of the things that was the most shocking to me is they said the average high school student now only writes an hour a week total. And if you think about an hour a week in high school, and by the way, when they talk about writing, we're not just talking about fill in the blank. We're talking about any kind of writing. And so it's not just fill in the blank, but having them learn to do some of the things is really important. So the side-by-side thing, I'm glad to see that I shared that with you so that you could see that. And I know there's more of you out there, so what else? Yeah, one of the things about looking at previous years' writing is have your students go in and actually go into their portfolios and look, and it's a really useful tool. I'm glad to see that somebody picked up on that too. That's a really good one. Yeah, and how to navigate E2Compose. Like I told you, I'm going to send this. I will be sending this PowerPoint to Brian and Jody to share out with you guys because I know who had to attend, along with the tracking sheets and the rubrics and things like that. There'll be a few little things that you should be expecting to get a copy of the email. And I'm going to send it as a PowerPoint, not as a Nearpod, so you don't need to worry. I'm not going to show the Nearpod. I'm just going to show the PowerPoint with you, and so that you can use it. And feel free to, like I said, as we're all typing, as you're all still typing, my contact information is at the end. And I'm happy to answer any questions. If anybody gets in and gets stuck, you have a hard time, like you can't remember something, just pop me an email. I promise I will answer you right back. And there isn't any question that I haven't been asked about this over the last 8 years, I promise. And we are working all the time to make it a better program. So if you ever have suggestions for things that you would like, make sure you send me an email because we always provide it to the vendor. So, and it's a really good way for me to, because you're the main users. I used to be the main user, but, now I just have to show people how to use it. So I'm happy to do that. I appreciate all the feedback that you guys are popping in. Feel free to keep adding it. I'm just going to switch. Here is my contact information. I will tell you they do have a support desk. Can't seem to get the text. Now, to have the check to work, and it's really shocking how little students, I mean, that's a national, by the way, just so you know, whoever it was that typed that comment in the chat, that's a national thing, but it's not very much writing. And a lot of the writing that they found that students, once they hit secondary level, do, a lot of it is fill in the blank type things or just really quick writes where they don't have to do any long compositions. And knowing all of you who are the best writers, and I'll leave you with this comment, and that is one thing to remember, no matter what, you are the best writers in your classroom. You may not be the most creative writers because, that may not be, but if you have a college degree on your wall, and you do, you are all the best writers in your classroom. And so you already know more about how to help them with writing than others. So that's one of the things I just want to leave you with, that you remember that. And then another thing, I want to thank you guys because I know doing remote training is really difficult, especially when it's the beginning of when everybody's just coming back from our nice holiday break. And if you have any questions, please drop me a line. The help support desk at E2Compose is good as well. And if you're ever having issues while your students are using it, it's probably a really good idea to just call the support desk right away, because a lot of times they can mirror and see what's going on and help you as you're doing it. Because if you call them, a lot of times, I mean, a lot of people will email me and I end up having to call them. But if you're doing that and you're in the middle of something, what's really nice is they understand. If you're like, I am sitting here with my class of fifth graders and they're staring at me like I've lost my mind because this isn't working, they can usually diagnose the problem. And if they can't, then they can tell you right away. So thank you so much, everybody, for your attention. And you get about half an hour of your lives back. Hopefully this is your lunchtime, so you get a little bit of break. So thank you so much. And I'm going to flip back and look at see if anybody else has added anything else on the comment board. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. And we're going to stop recording now. Thank you.